This episode of New Politics was released on the 17th of April, 2026, and produced on the lands of the Wangal and Gadigal people.
The Liberal Party has released a hardline, values-based immigration policy, but is it a serious plan to get back into government or just a gimmick to stop the leakage of votes to one nation? And who decides what these values are and who will actually enforce them? Because it's unclear how any of this will work or exactly what it's trying to achieve. I'm Eddie Djokovic.
I'm David Lewis. All of this is coming up in this big episode of New Politics.
And just a reminder that New Politics is produced by independent media. We publish extended analysis each and every week. And if you value independent journalism without the influence of corporate backing, join us at newpolitics.com.au and support us directly. It's just $5 per month. You can also join up at Substack and Patreon, and all of this is a good way to support independent journalism.
Looking for a policy fight on immigration.
Labor's also opened up the migration floodgates.
The opposition leader says he would enshrine Australian values as a universal visa condition, make non-citizens wait longer for social security help, and
will make learning English an obligation for permanent visa holders, not an option.
Also, protection claims from a list of safe countries would be quickly refused and temporary protection visas brought back. Taylor channeling his special guest John Howard's signature moment on migration.
We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
We'll decide who deserves protection and the circumstances in which that protection is granted.
The coalition is starting to push forward with a values-based immigration system, including looking at people's social media accounts to see what they've been posting. And David, all of this just seems to be a part of this right-wing move towards the Trumpification of Australian politics. And it's not an exact copy of the lunatic politics of Donald Trump, but it is this deliberate move towards the culture wars and identity politics, less than 12 months of this sort of politics being thoroughly rejected at the last federal election. Now, the Liberal Party, they might be slow learners when it comes to all of this, but it's not clear if this is an attempt to become politically relevant again or just trying to neutralise the rise of one nation as a conservative force. But either way, I just don't think that it's going to work for either party. But it's pretty obvious that Angus Taylor is just going through this process of trying to gain traction with all of this, putting out these thought bubbles out to the public. And we also have to take into account that Australia already has a values-based immigration system. It's always been the case with our immigration system. And essentially, David, when you weigh all of this up, politics is always based around results. And we saw at the South Australia election recently that the Liberal Party was pushed into third place behind the Labor Party and One Nation. And there's also a by-election coming up in the seat of Favour in New South Wales that will provide us with some more electoral evidence about this sort of strategy that Angus Taylor is putting out. But at the moment, to me, it just looks like desperation from Angus Taylor and from the Liberal Party. All of the evidence suggests that it's not going to work politically, and it's just more than likely going to accelerate that splintering on the right side of politics and cancelling out the effect of one nation. That's exactly what happened at the South Australia election. And if they continue to cancel each other out, well, that might end up being a good thing anyway.
It's one of the more toxic legacies of the Howard government, a government that left a lot of toxic legacies. I think that's fair to say. There's much more negative than positive that comes out of Howard. But Howard, of course, was able to neutralise the rise of one nation by adopting a lot of, or seeming to adopt, a lot of one nation policies. And when I say seeming to adopt, I mean it was already part of what he wanted to do anyway. And of course, those disaffected Liberal voters who thought that the Liberal Party was too urban and sophisticated went to One Nation. Howard then was able to win them back by saying, no, we're not urban sophisticates. We're Philistinic Neanderthals just like you. And I'm being unfair to the voters here, but maybe I'm not either. And so politically, let's be fair, politically it was a brilliant strategy. It paid off for the Howard government electorally, the second longest serving Prime Minister in Australian history after Robert Menzies, a man with no obvious talents, as in he wasn't a big room filler like Menzies or Hawke or like Whitlam. He didn't have the vocal acuity of a Keating or a Rudd, say. I've said before, and I'll say he was one of the very best public speakers I've ever seen, even if I disagreed with every word he said. And I think his ability to win one room over at a time was unnoticed, but definite. But yeah, Howard is able to win. And this is what win over one nation voters. And this is what Taylor is trying to do. But Angus Taylor is no John Howard. John Howard, for all his manifest faults, all his manifest things that we disagree with, was an exceptionally talented politician. And to forget this means that you suddenly misunderstand those 15 or so years of Australian politics where the Liberal Party was dominant.
But I guess the point is that this isn't traditional Liberal Party politics anymore. And no. As you refer to, this was probably trashed some 30 years ago under John Howard. But it's no longer about this focus on economic management, because the electorate no longer believes that idea of the Liberal Party being the better economic manager. It's a bit of a myth anyway, but they just no longer believe it. And because the Labor Party and the Liberal Party, they've got more or less the same commitment to neoliberal philosophy. And in politics, you do have to have a point of difference about you. So I guess that's why you get the Liberal Party focusing more on these culture wars, on nationalism, jingoism, that politics of division as well. And that's the big thing, that politics of division. And here's a good example of this from Angus Taylor.
Now, broadly speaking, migrants fall into two categories. There's those of noble and patriotic intent. Someone who wants to become Australian, embrace Australia and contribute to Australia. And overwhelmingly, the vast majority of people who come to this great country fall into that category. And then there is the migrant of subversive intent. Someone who rejects our way of life, who doesn't want to change for Australia and wants Australia to change for them, who's here for transactional reasons and transactional intent. And worse, declining immigration standards have seen our door open to migrants of subversive intent. Consider what we've seen in recent years. The Bondi Beach terrorist attack, genocidal marches in major cities, anti-Semitism across Australian communities. These are the ramifications of an immigration system where standards have eroded.
So the migrant of subversive intent, David, that's actually a good name for a band. I think we should create a band using that name, the migrants of subversive intent. Maybe he's talking about me, I don't know. But the issue is that when you have a political leader like that, conflating immigration with the Bondi shooters, even though one of those Bondi shooters was born in Australia, and then making that link with the pro-Palestine marches, well, you just know that a politician has been bought and is owned by the Israel lobby, and he's using exactly the same language that's being used by Chris Minns in New South Wales, but that's a separate issue. We'll leave that one aside for the time being. But this is essentially what we showed in that clip before. That's division for the sake of division. It's all this values-based crap. The thing is that who decides what these values are? And talked about a lot about John Howard so far, but John Howard, he did set up that citizenship test where you had to remember Don Bradman's batting average or something, or how many sixes he hit or centuries, and that's because John Howard was a cricket fan. But the point is that you can't really study all of these values before you do a test. It's like you have to live those values first. You have to be here and you become a citizen, and then you become part of the Australian society. And the other issue is that the values that Angus Taylor is actually pushing, freedom, dignity, equality, the rule of law, fair go, that's all well and good. That sounds fantastic. We want everyone to have those values. But the Liberal Party doesn't really believe in any of those. And if we're looking at their behaviour when they were in government between 2013 and 2022, they don't really, they might say all of these things, but in practice, they don't really act them out.
It's a really basic way of defining Australian values. I don't drink. I don't watch sport. I rarely go to the beach.
Oh, mate, what's going on there?
I know, but yet I was born in Dubbo, New South Wales, about as real Aussie as you can get in terms of the natural way that you're supposed to be Australian. Australia really has always been a diverse and multicultural country, even if we don't acknowledge it. I've said this before, the first mosque in Australia was in Bourke, New South Wales, for the Cameleers. They were called Afghans. In fact, they were mostly from Lebanon. And they basically took the goods from west to east across the desert using camels because they came from a desert environment and knew how to do it in a way that English or European descended people didn't. We, of course, had Chinese immigration here from about the 1830s. And while it was horrible in some cases, in other cases, Chinese people were accepted as part of the community in laundries in prescribed ways, which is problematic. But still, the Chinese laundry, the Chinese restaurant later, were vital and important parts of the culture. We could go on and on. The Liberal Party doesn't revert Chifley's opening up of the Immigration Act to Eastern Europeans, and it doesn't reverse Whitlam's revocation of the White Australia policy. Fraser's party overturned a lot of what Whitlam tried to achieve. It takes down what was then called Medibank. It stops free education as best as it can, although that was more Labor. But when it came to immigration, when it came to what a citizenship was, they left it untouched. Multiculturalism remained Australian policy, but in practice, there's that underground, the dog whistle of this isn't right.
But I guess that's what it is. It's a dog whistle because, sure, you do want everyone to subscribe to those values that were mentioned by Angus Taylor, people who were coming in, not just people who were coming into the country to migrate, but everyone's already living here, people who have already been born here. But the freedom that Angus Taylor was talking about, great, have the freedom, but that's already being undermined by that idea of checking the social media accounts and we'll let you be free, but we're going to surveil you. We're going to check out your political bias. And then the question is, who gets to choose what's acceptable and who's not in these sort of situations? Who gets to choose what is freedom and what is not freedom?
The freedom of speech warriors, the freedom of religion warriors are the first ones to shut down debate they don't like. They're also the first ones to condemn religions they don't like, even though the religions are lawful, law-abiding, essentially moral, and don't really disturb anyone else, which is the ideal in a plural secular society. Sure, go and have your faith and belief and live your life according to the tenets, provided that those tenets are in line with broad Australian legality and the want of Australians not to be bothered by your view. I've said before, I live in a very Muslim suburb. I can see the Lakemba Mosque from my place. It shouldn't bother, and it doesn't, but I shouldn't be offended by the practice of a quiet religion that has no bearing on my day-to-day life.
And it's also a situation where the coalition, or the Liberal Party more specifically, like it thinks that it can outdo One Nation on all of these issues. But history suggests that this sort of approach doesn't end very well, David. And if you start to try and copy what a fringe party is doing, and that's what One Nation is, it's a fringe party, well, it doesn't make that fringe party weaker, it just makes them seem more legitimate. And if you're trying to copy a fringe party as well, well, that means that you are the fringe party too. And we've already had Pauline Hanson taking credit for the Liberal Party immigration announcement. And I think the other issue is that if there are the voters out there, and there are the voters that will really want these sort of policies, they will go straight to the source. They will go straight to One Nation. And all of these are pretty much racist policies, in my opinion. But what the Liberal Party would be better off doing is distracting these sort of voters from their racism with policies which improve their lives directly, creating more jobs for everyone or better opportunities for everyone, rather than creating policies that make people believe that a migrant is going to steal their job or steal their money. Work on policies that create better opportunities. And I think the Labor Party learned this lesson the hard way under Kim Beazley when he was trying to mimic John Howard on border protection and asylum seeker issues, and people said, oh no, we want the real thing. We want little Johnny. Kevin Rudd, similar sort of thing on the asylum seekers when he was in office the second time around. Same sort of issue. People just didn't believe it. So they go for the coalition because they think, no, these are the people that have got the real policies on asylum seekers that we want to see. So ultimately that ends up being the case. So you just wonder, if people are not going to believe you when you say these sort of things, why do you keep bothering with this sort of policy?
S.M. Bruce, the Australian Prime Minister from 1920 to 1929, used to tell the story of a seat in northern Queensland where a lot of Italian people moved in the 20s to help with the cane fields. They'd go up there for the work. And one of the candidates for an election there was giving a speech, as they did, and someone yells out, "What are you going to do about the damned Italians?" And the candidate said, "I'm not going to do a damn thing about them. How would you be going to their country, not knowing the language, trying to find work, setting up? I shouldn't have to look after you fellas." And all the Nationalist Party senior said, "Oh, that's it. We've lost that seat." And he came back with an increased majority. Hope is always better than fear. It's harder though. And trusting your electorate to be able to make adult decisions and behave in a mature way is hard too for politicians. They want to be seen as leaders and they want to be seen. So it's easier to cow them and to make them seem that you're the only one who can do this rather than say, no, these are what we can do.
Well, you look at Andrew G in the seat of Calais.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. He said, no, I disagree with my party's view on The Voice. I cannot stand this. And they all thought he was going to lose. They thought that he was against what his seat was thinking.
Yeah, well, he resigned from the National Party, ran as an independent, got an increased vote. Yeah. And I think Australians are generally, naturally an optimistic lot. But we've had 30 years of being told, oh, no, it's all bad. Murdoch press doesn't help. The anti-vax movement wouldn't have got anywhere without the Murdoch press. The whole anti-Dan Andrews thing. Now, and again, you're allowed to disagree with politicians and you're even allowed to dislike politicians. But it was the sheep-like behaviour of, we don't like him. Okay, why is that? He's too woke. What does that mean? Oh, he built too much infrastructure. You don't want more roads? Oh, he's spending too much money. What would you cut? And basically it went, we'd cut immigrants. The Victorian government has no control over immigration. Australians need to be reminded that we are the country of a fair go, the country of mates helping mates. And even this, when those miners were caught in the mines and it was pure Aussie mateship got them out. And I'm thinking, wasn't it lucky it wasn't Wales or Canada or somewhere, because the rescuers would say, oh, if we were Australian, we could help them. But in this country, we don't help each other. But it seemed a bit icky that Australian values got them out, whereas I think it was just normal, basic human values that got them out, not this nationalist, over-exaggerated nationalism. And yes, Australia is different to other countries in the world. We have different attitudes towards particular things. But on that point, I was actually a little bit surprised with the Labor government's response, because usually with all of these sorts of issues that relate to immigration, they adopt Anthony Albanese's trademark caution. They curl up into a ball and just hope that the issue goes away. Let's not talk about it and it will subside. But on this occasion, with all of this immigration stuff, they've actually gone on the front foot. They've actually been quite powerful on this message. Tony Burke has been there attacking Angus Taylor.
If you look at Mr Taylor's speech, there's not one line in that speech that delivers an extra job, not one line that builds an extra home, not one line that actually makes us any safer. Australia is and should always be a country where we judge you by who you are, not where you're from.
And here's Tanya Plibersek attacking Angus Taylor on that issue of the migrant of subversive intent.
My parents fled communism to come to Australia. I know that there were plenty of people who fled the USSR who came to Australia. There are others who fled fascist Germany during the Second World War. The idea that people fleeing persecution, totalitarianism and extremism can't be good Australian citizens totally misses the point of the reason they left home in the first place.
And I think on these sort of issues, but also a lot of other issues as well, I think it's about time that the Labor government actually started pushing back with all of these sort of culture war issues, because it's clear who the Liberal Party is actually targeting with all this right-wing immigration stuff. It's the Muslim communities, it's the people who are pro-Palestine, migrants from all the brown and black regions of the world. And the Liberal Party just seems to be wanting to take things back to the White Australia policy, or take Australia back to a time that never really existed anyway. And there's also all that dog whistling stuff about learning English on arrival. But the point is that most migrants already do this. There's also a de facto English test through the citizenship test anyway, which is all in English. You've got to understand English to do the citizenship test. And most countries around the world, well, they do have language tests as part of their applications for citizenship. So that shouldn't be an ordeal or a big deal. And it does help you with making your way within that new community. My parents didn't actually speak a word of English when they arrived in Australia, but they picked it up pretty quickly. My older brother didn't speak a word of English either, but he ended up becoming a school teacher. And this sort of experience, it's something that's happened so many times in Australia's migrant experience. So sure, it does help, but it shouldn't be the be-all and end-all of migration application or affect your ability to be a good citizen.
They've narrowed it to English, which is good. Back in 1934, the European writer Egon Kisch tried to come into the country and they denied him his visa because he was a communist and he was here on a speaking tour. He wrote a very good book called Australian Landfall about his experience. He ends up jumping off the boat, breaking his leg when he jumps off the boat. And when they give him the test, they decide to give it in Scots Gaelic. Now, Kisch spoke 7 languages, including English, fluently.
But not that one.
But not Gaelic, no. And he said the customs officer read out a phrase and said, "Can you translate that?" And of course, Kish says, "No." "Oh, I'll read it again." He says it, and it's completely different the second time round.
And that's what the language test was at that time.
Yeah.
It was a language test, but in any language of the government's choice.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, Kish got to do his speaking test. I forget who the Minister for Immigration was at the time then, but one of his arguments was, sure, Kish has written 12 books, but how many of them were in English? So there's always been this, having said that Australians are expensive and positive and accepting mostly, there's always been this rump of people who don't get that immigration is good. I heard a Clive Palmer ad, must have been on the radio, and one of the latest things is no immigration. Good luck with that. And by no immigration, I suspect he means no immigrations from countries we don't approve of. And those aren't necessarily criminal countries, just countries where the language and the skin colour don't match. I can't see Palmer winning votes by saying we don't want any of those English or Irish bludgers coming in either, taking our jobs, not speaking idiomatic Australian in the way we do. If that happens, I'll rethink my stance, but I don't think that's going to happen.
This is New Politics, independent analysis of Australian and international politics. For more free articles and analysis, join us at newpolitics.com.au.
I think this overall approach being pushed through by the Liberal Party at the moment, well, that's something that's not just on immigration, but a whole lot of other issues as well, like the cultural wars and stuff like that. That's happening in other parts of the world where conservative parties are moving away from that traditional idea of economic management and they're moving over to identity politics, looking at immigration, nationalism, and also creating anxiety within the community over these issues to get more electoral appeal and get more votes. And on the surface, well, it might look like it's working, but the only thing that we've really got at the moment in all of these different countries and also in Australia is opinion polls. Now, One Nation is showing high numbers in opinion polls, and they did actually get a high primary vote in the South Australia election, but they only won a few seats. They're nowhere near getting power or gaining office in Australia. Reform UK, well, they've actually got a similar situation in Britain where they've got a high opinion or a high rating in the opinion polls at the moment, but haven't really performed very well at all. And they've been around for a few years, but they've only won one by-election over the 15 or so that they've contested over the years, and they won 5 seats out of 650 seats at the last UK general election. Now, that might change before the next British election in 2029, but that's 3 years away, and we don't know what's going to happen at that point. And just the last weekend in the Hungarian elections, Viktor Orbán from the far right, he was thrown out of office after 16 years in power. Why he was in office for 16 years, I've got no idea. But, sure, we can argue, well, that's Hungary and not Australia. But there's similar rejections of this sort of politics happening elsewhere. In the United States, Donald Trump, he's actually still in the position, but he's deeply polarising. He's got a disapproval rating of 63%. And probably going to lose the midterm elections as well in the Senate and the House of Representatives over there. But I just think that people are just getting sick of all this garbage. People have always wanted solutions historically from their political leaders. And that, for as long as I know, that's what people want from their political leaders. They want solutions. And the world is becoming more complex, and there are complex issues and problems that need to be resolved. And the far right and the culture war warriors, they add to these problems. They create trouble. That's all they're good for. And I think that's why Viktor Orbán was thrown out of office in Hungary. People want politicians solving problems, not creating problems. And I think that's the biggest message that the right or the centre right of politics keeps missing out on, and especially the Liberal Party in Australia.
Hungary was, of course, very interesting.
Well, they went from far right to centre right.
Centre right, yeah, but a more moderate right that hopefully doesn't stand for corruption, and they ran on that. They ran on that platform. But a right that acknowledges individual effort over collective effort and entrepreneurialism and freedom from too much government control and all of that stuff that the centre right has always done. And we can argue over the merits of it, but most of it is actually manageable. I'll put it that way. It might not be good, but it's at least manageable, as opposed to Orbán's far-right, immature authoritarianism. Canada is a bit the same. And, of course, Canada is notable for not thinking Murdoch is a fit and proper person to hold. So Canada's right tends to be a little bit milder than the right of Britain or Australia can be, or America for that matter. I think we're heading towards a move away from the far-right populist politics. I think the Hungarian people not listening to J.D. Vance and Trump and rejecting Orbán comprehensively. Too big to rig, as they've been saying. 77% turnout, which is high compared to Britain and America, which sort of struggles around the 65%. And again, another reason why I think just make it compulsory. It's not that big a deal. And you get more honest. Doesn't mean that compulsory voting is perfect. We still got Scott Morrison and Tony Abbott, for example. But at least we can own them and say, yep, we made those mistakes. We know how not to do them again. Whereas at 60%, you can just remove 20% of those who voted, put in another 20% and keep the status quo. But yeah, I believe that we're moving away from that one nation, and each one nation reform, MAGA, Orbán, Bolsonaro in Brazil. I don't need to keep listing them. You all know who I'm talking about. We're moving away from that model of politics, and that's a good thing, I think. Back to a sensible and mature approach. And I think that's what people are after, a sensible and mature approach rather than an easy and childish approach.
Oh, I think that's right. But it is also, sensible politics means solving problems. And I think that's the big message that the Liberal Party needs to take on, solve problems instead of creating them. And they would argue, immigration is the problem. I don't think it is. I don't think too many people actually think that immigration is a problem. And sure, there are people that feel it's the biggest problem in the universe at the moment. I don't think it is, but that's an argument for the Liberal Party to resolve. But I guess the big issue is solve problems instead of creating them. And there's also this whole immigration issue. It's a battle within the Liberal Party as well. And that's been going on for years. It's the moderates against the hardliners, economics versus the culture war, politics, liberalism versus conservatism. And those, like in any party, those battles are not going to go away anytime soon. But it just seems to be quite prominent within the Liberal Party at the moment. And I think this navel-gazing and also internal arguments within the Liberal Party, I think it just makes the job for the Labor government so much easier at the next election. And this is exactly what happened at the last federal election. And Peter Dutton and the Liberal Party, they pretty much produced the script writing, the campaign messages and all the copy for the Labor Party to use at the 2025 federal election campaign. And my feeling with Angus Taylor and all this sort of rubbish is that we're seeing this sort of process of history repeating itself. And all the Labor Party has to do is point to Angus Taylor and say, look, he might not have the orange hair, but he's exactly like Donald Trump. That's what they did with Peter Dutton. They just have to leave it there. You don't have to say anything more. But I think there's also other factors going on behind the scenes here. The long-term issues for the Liberal Party have been identified. There's just so much material out there. There's so much research, analysis. We've talked about it especially since the last election. We've talked about it incessantly. And there's other learned people out there who are doing the same sort of research, but it just seems like the Liberal Party is just not listening. They dumped the research that they commissioned themselves about the failures of the 2025 election campaign, and because they decided not to read it and take it all in, I just feel that they're making the same mistakes with this sort of stuff. But once they start replacing serious policy work with these sort of tin pot policies that try and stir up trouble and cause more culture wars, once the party starts doing this, and they started that a long time ago, it's just incredibly difficult to unwind all of that.
One of my consistent themes over years now is that the party needs to be broken right down and reformed. And we've hit beyond 1943 in terms of its structure. And 1943 was when Robert Menzies decided we need to redo things and forms the Liberal Party in 1944, and it goes on to win in 1949 and then stay in power till 1972. That was too long for a party to be in power, by the way, but I can't change the history of things. I can report on it, though. The party is on a hiding to nothing. It still holds power in Tasmania and Queensland. Now, the Queensland is a bit different because it's a combined party of National and Liberal parties, and it was able to exploit a tired Labor government in Queensland. Now, Queensland's a Labor state, by the way. The party forms in Queensland, at least according to the legend, and the legend has a lot of truth in it. And till Bjelke-Petersen, the vast majority of Queensland governments were Labor, and the first Labor government in the world was a Queensland government, the Dawson government of 1899. But also, after Bjelke-Petersen, there's been more Labor than Liberal or LNP governments in Queensland. So as a lot of people are lazily, a lot of analysts are lazily, Queensland's a very conservative state. Not really. It's had probably, I think, more Labor governments than New South Wales has, and more than Victoria. So that the current Queensland government is LNP is a bit of an anomaly in two ways, but it made sense at the time.
Well, maybe the point is that because they're still in government in Tasmania and also in Queensland, they've already got the structures in place of a political party. So it's easy to just keep using those structures that are already in place instead of trying to rework anything or everything again or demolish what's already there. But we have to, just going back to the Hungarian election, Peter Magyar, there was a new political party called the Tzar Party. So that went from zero to hero within the one election. I guess what I'm saying is that it is possible to just demolish a party, set up some new shoots there and go from not having any political representation at all into forming government. It's probably a lot more difficult within Australia, which has got a population that's 3 times larger than the Hungarian population. So a smaller political system is easier to change, but there's still possibilities there that could be explored. It did happen in 1943. I can't see it happening now. I think it should happen, but it's probably a case where they're already in office in those sort of smaller locations, but the structures are already in place, and maybe that's the thing that's too difficult to change.
Yeah, it happened in 1977 too, quietly, and then I think you could argue that the consolidation of that was 1993, when John Howard becomes opposition leader and is able to start purging moderates from the party. And the reform of the party is done while it's in government even, because that first term, Howard is able to get rid of a lot of the moderates out of either through coercion or through political violence. He doesn't, for our listeners overseas, he doesn't execute anyone or jail anyone.
He would have liked to.
I'm sure he would have. He more or less stuck to the rule book in the letter, if not the spirit. But he does manage to reform the party. I doubt Angus Taylor has the subtle thinking that Howard had to be able to do that. And I think the Liberal Party has to start making some very harsh and hard decisions. And whether it does, we're closing this whole shop down and here's our new party, and all our members were a member of the Liberal Party, but they're now a member of the Australia.
Reform Australia.
Yep. We're not Clive Palmer or Pauline Hanson. Don't look at us for that. Whatever they want to call it. I doubt they'll call it the Australian Conservatives, because I think Australia prefers the idea of the classical liberalism to classical conservatism.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. And if you value independent journalism without the influence of corporate backing, join New Politics at newpolitics.com.au and support us directly. It's just $5 per month, and we always try to keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.